And we're live. Hey everyone, this is Nicholas Roman, author and creator of Scratch Health, How to Create a Whole New You in 90 Days from Scratch. And today, just like we have the last few weeks, we have a special guest that I'm very looking forward to introducing to you guys, and he's going to go and obviously talk about his expertise. But who I have with me today is a Dr. William Corder, and this guy is just awesome. I just want to give you a little bit of background about Dr. Corder and exactly what he's accomplished. But he has an impressive background. He's been a respected expert in the healthcare system for many, many years. He has founded the Boomer Health Institute, which is, if you're looking for it, you can look for it at boomerhealthinstitute.com. He's the published author of the Boomer Survival Kit, an indispensable guide for yourself, your relationships, your life, and the goal of helping the baby boomers redesign their lives away from their careers and going more, moving towards a more meaningful life. He's also served as an associate medical director of a large healthcare agency for over 17 years, managing a health system with an annual budget of $100 million, which treated over 20,000 patients per year. Pretty big time stuff. He also worked as a national physician consultant, shaping the care of over 30,000 patients for 16 years through physician advice on different complicated, difficult cases from the East Coast and the Presbyterian Hospital all the way to the West Coast and Stanford Medical Center. He's also lectured his original program, Prescription for Effective Living, for over the last 20 years through Southern California and done keynote speeches for many different organizations across the country. So I just want to give a big hand and welcome Dr. William Corder. How you doing, sir?
Great, Nick, and thank you very much for having me on your show. And I have a lot of respect for what you're doing, so hopefully it'll be fun and educational today.
I appreciate that. Absolutely. We were kind of talking before air, and your experiences are, not just saying this because we're on air, but I was very impressed. You've done a lot of things, and what I want to do is just kind of let this all be about you today. I'll try to stay out of the way as much as possible and just give you the fuel you need to kind of talk about what you've been doing and the impact that you've made.
I'm happy to share everything and anything and discuss any topic that will be of interest to you and the audience.
So I usually like to start kind of from the beginning and then working our way forward. One of the questions I always love to ask everyone is, what was some of your inspiration, or what was your inspiration for getting involved with what you do, especially in the specific movement of the baby boomers and writing the book and just going towards that path when you could have chosen so many different routes? You specifically went towards baby boomers. So I just wanted you to kind of expand upon what was some of the reasonings and everything.
Well, they're both, Nick, professional and personal, and let me go over both components. In terms of the professional part, you already mentioned I was associate medical director of a large healthcare agency. That allowed me to really see the medical illnesses, the psychiatric illnesses, the substance abuse components for all demographics. At the same time, I did national consulting. And in the national consulting, whether from, as you said, from New York or to San Francisco, I also did all demographics. So I would see all age groups and the struggles they were having and the medical issues they were having. And what I collectively noticed through both jobs and both positions is the two groups, I think, in this country that are under the most stress for physical illnesses, psychiatric illnesses, substance abuse component, are the people in their early 20s and the people in their 50s and 60s. And you have two quadrants there, two groups, that one group is trying to get on the conveyor belt of establishing a career and a path of life, and the other group is trying to get off the conveyor belt that they've been on for the last 20, 30, sometimes 40 years. And it's very hard today in today's economy to get on the right conveyor belt, the right career, and it's very hard to get off that conveyor belt because a lot of people who thought they were going to be retiring are not clearly going to retire for years. And so I was interested in both those groups, and that was the professional component. The personal component was really twofold. I stopped working one of the positions to focus on some areas of interest like writing the book and redesigning my own life. And I know when I stopped that one position, my wife and I went to Vegas, celebrated, had a bottle of champagne, and we did a bucket list. But when I got up the next morning and looked at the bucket list, it really didn't resonate with me. I felt it was probably more important to redesign my life and try to be a better person. And I told that to my wife, and of course, she smiled and supported me, but was rather doubtful that I would be able to do that. But she gave me the freedom. We decided not to do any bucket list or any of that pursuit. So I took a whole year to focus on trying to improve myself through education, through maybe listening to courses like yours or programs like yours. But in the midst of doing that, on a Sunday night, I had a call from one of my best friends. I known him for 30 plus years, and he called me to say, Bill, and I could tell when I picked up the phone,
Hmm.
you could tell he was a little intoxicated and he was a little distraught. And he said, Bill, I'm calling to say um, goodbye. You've been a great friend, and I just want you to know I appreciated your friendship and support all these years. Right now, I'm standing on a fifth floor balcony in Santa Monica, California, and I'm about ready to jump to the concrete below. So thank you for your friendship.
Wow.
And my
Wow.
reaction was shock at the moment. I flagged down my wife thinking I could give her the Rolodex and let her call 911. But you know, he was still sharp enough to say, Bill, I know what you're going to do. You're going to ask your wife Priscilla to call 911. If you make any attempt to call 911, I'll hang up. If you make any attempt to talk me out of suicide, I'll hang up. I just want to talk friend to friend. So what I did is I took that call, put away the Rolodex, went into the living room, which was dark at the time, and for 90 minutes I spoke to him about his life. And
Okay.
I think his life is representative of what happens to so many people. And that is, he was coming up to age 60. He was dissatisfied with parts of his career. Parts had been very good, but parts had been, a struggle. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and he was still grieving that loss. He also had two young adult daughter and the young adult children, one son, one daughter, and the relationships were a little bit south. And he was still struggling to repair those. He
Mm.
also had physical issues. He had a hip replacement and a bulky knee from a college injury in football. And so he went through the litany of his life and the litany of setbacks. But midway through the conversation, he surprised me again because he said, Bill, I've heard that you're redesigning your life. Tell me about what you're doing. So
Hmm.
I explained how I was trying to learn more about physical health, more about emotional health, more about spiritual health, more about redesigning your and reigniting your dreams and your passions. And as I went through part of it, not all of it, he stopped me in the middle and he said, Bill, that's the best prescription I've ever heard. You got to make me a promise. And I was more than willing to make a promise. So I said, Jeff, I will make that promise. And he said, I want you to publish it as a book. Help people like me. And if you do that, that would be fantastic. So
Wow.
that night, I made that promise, and I kept the promise. Um, the unfortunate part, as soon as I made that promise, he said, "Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate it," and he hung up. And so that night, I didn't know whether he had jumped to his death or not. But the next morning around 10 o'clock, and I did not sleep very well, I got a call from this individual, and he was checking himself into a psychiatric hospital. So I called the psychiatrist, and with confidentiality laws, I can give him information. He can't give me information. But
Right.
I explained the situation about my friend, hoping that they would keep him a long time. Well, they kept him 3 days, and on the third day rounds, the doctor came around, and my friend lied. He said,
Mm.
"Oh yeah, the antidepressant is working. I'm feeling great. I'm ready to go home and start living a good life." So they discharged him. On the way home, he did not refill his medication. He got himself a bottle of vodka, and that night, from that same balcony, he jumped to his death. And so I was, distraught that I had not been able to help him more. But I tell you, when I went to his service, several people came up to me, and he had spoken to him that same night, and they had all said, he really liked your ideas, and he really wanted you to commit to that promise. And so that gave me the inspiration and the motivation to go ahead and continue to focus on material and to continue to finish the book. And the one irony is I think if I could have finished the book before he called, or
Hmm.
could have frozen time and gone back and presented all of it, I think I could have saved his life. But I
Right.
just only had part of the solution, not all of the solution. So those are the two motivations, professional and personal.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. That's very powerful. But you know what? I mean, you fulfilled your promise, and although obviously you couldn't save him, but who knows how many thousands of people's lives are you affecting right now, and are making huge changes, and maybe even changes in people's lives who are thinking along those same lines.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for, and I think that's what, all of us, including you, Nick, probably hope for. Is that you're trying to make a difference so that people start living a little better life than what they're currently living. Because there are a lot of people who are dissatisfied with their current lives, and a lot of people who are physically ill or emotionally ill, and really need to change the direction of their life more so than just getting another medication.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's a good point that you bring up. You talk about, and this is where I think that a lot of people they kind of miss it. They kind of miss that is that they focus so much on they think that fitness is synonymous with health, and they tend to forget that. Well, no, that, I don't think that they forget. They don't really know that one doesn't necessarily equal the other, and there are many different facets of health, like you just spoke about. Your friend is obviously he was distraught. He had different other issues that were going on with him that could be seen as health related. You know, mental health, you have social health, you know, spiritual health. You have all these different facets that kind of make up health, that make us healthy. You know, being connected with other people and being social. Um, and I believe that that people with your work, baby boomers, and people like myself talking about um, showing people how to bridge the gap between the two, between health and fitness, and understanding the different areas of health. That's going to be what's next in line of, you know, the big wave of helping people on a realistic level, and actually making a real impact, as opposed to just those surface level changes through fitness because they went and they did some jogging or did some running, and they don't really know exactly what else is happening on the inside.
Right.
You know,
And I love the Hemingway quote, first you must last. That's always been one of my favorite quotes from Hemingway. But to me, that translates, you got to get yourself into good physical shape first. And then
right.
if you get yourself into good physical shape, then you have the energy, the vitality, and the cognitive clarity to start working on your life.
Hmm.
So I'm a big proponent of getting yourself into good physical shape, but then taking that physical shape and changing the rest of your life.
Right, right, powerful. Um, and you know, one of the things that we spoke about as well is you know, staying on that point for a minute, talking about inspiration. You know, and this is a big part of people like us who are in this field. We do what we do because at some point we were inspired because of a situation or of someone. You know, I have not similar, but my father, who suffered from weight or being obese for many years, you know, recently passed, and he was one of the reasons that now I'm really making more of a concentrated effort to kind of spread the message more. I mean, the business of Scratch Health and the book and everything was already there, and I've been teaching people for a long time. But it's amazing how just a little bit more of a push or inspiration, now you're going to full throttle, and you really want to start to make sure that that doesn't happen to the best of your ability to other people who could be helped by your information. And
Right.
you know, and I wanted to ask
And
you a question regarding. Go ahead.
I think one of the reasons that I support you so much is that you really help people get into good physical health and get away from their obesity or go diabetes or whatever medical condition they have. And I think once that help is given, then they have the energy and the vitality and the inspiration to say, okay, well, what about the rest of my life? What needs to change to make me feel better?
I agree. I agree. And one of the things I liked is you said you were sitting down with your wife talking about the bucket list, and you were just writing this different, you know, ideas and goals and things that you wanted to look at. And then you realize when it was all done, it was just a list that really didn't mean anything. And that's a good point, because I speak about it a lot in other podcasts and audios that I've done, which is something that I call going beyond why. And that
Yep,
kind of clarifies it, you know, exactly with what your story says, is because we tend to write things that we kind of just like a list where if you show it to somebody, they could say, okay, well that's nice, or that's respectable, but it's
yep,
not something that really moves you.
yep.
And when you get that, when you find out, when you go beyond why, you find out what moves you, that's when you start to make those, you know, those real changes, those
Right.
hardcore changes.
Yep. And I think if you always need to understand the why before the how. And if you can understand why you want to do something, then you can figure out the how you're going to change your life or which direction of your life you're going to go. But that why is crucial.
Right, right. Let's talk a little bit about a phrase that you used that I was reading about in your book, which was the graying tsunami.
Hmm.
What exactly does that mean, so that everybody can kind of have an understanding? What does the graying tsunami mean, and how is that affecting everyone right now?
Well, I tell you, we are in a very unusual position, and that is we have 74 to 77 million baby boomers. And baby boomers are those people who were born between 1946 and 1964. And America is not unique in that phrase. If you look around the world, by 2030, we'll have a population between 8 and 9 billion people, but close to 2 billion people are going to be 60 or 65 years old and older. So we have a huge segment of the world, the entire world, that is an older segment, the first time in history. And so we have what I call a demographic earthquake or graying tsunami. Whether you go to China or Japan, I mean, instead of seeing the black hair that you have, you're going to see the gray hair that I have. And there's just too many people out there that are growing old and living beyond what we used to live. And I think the key for society is that does place a huge burden on society unless those people can change their lives and be productive and contribute. And so I'm for everybody reevaluating their life, but I push some of the baby boomers to reevaluate because they can still contribute, still make a difference, still find happiness, and still chase their dreams if they just don't give up and think they can't do it.
Right, right. What are some methods or ideas, or maybe a philosophy that you teach that some baby boomers can start to, utilize, or take those tools, throw it in their toolbox, and really start to make some changes in their life on a health perspective, mental health, the different facets of health.
Mhm. Well, here's a couple things. I'm a great believer in the 80-20 rule. It applies to a lot of different areas, but the way that I use it is the following. I think 80% of your happiness comes from 20% of your activity. And
Okay.
the problem with most people is that when they're looking for a job, they take a job that's available. And the problem with so many people is that that 20% of activity that gives them so much joy, it gets less and less and less as they move through life because they don't have time for those activities.
Right.
And in fact, they get so involved in their work and taking material home from work and putting in 50, 60, 70 hours a week on their work that they even forget about those areas of passion or about those areas that give them so much happiness.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I ask people is to pause, hit the pause button. Really stop your life for a moment and say, what are the things that give you the most joy, and are you doing them? And if you're not doing them, why are you not doing them? And what can you do to incorporate some of those things back into your life? And I think if you expand that 20%, then you're going to expand the joy in your life.
Right. No, that's great. And it's funny that you say that, because I actually, in my book, I talk about the 80-20 rule a lot. So it's just interesting how we have a lot of different things that we speak about that are actually very similar. So I just find that funny.
No, and another thing that I ask people, and this strikes some audiences as strange, I'll ask them, when was the last time you helped somebody?
Hmm.
Um, and that's helping somebody outside of your profession and outside of your office. So in your case, it wouldn't be helping someone over the internet or helping someone on your podcast. It would be helping someone as you're out walking on the street or out doing an errands. And the reason I ask that of people is that a lot of people can't tell me when was the last time they went out of their way to help somebody. But I push it because I think one of the keys in life in terms of getting back to being focused on where you want to go in life is connection with people. You
Right.
can't do it alone. And one
Right.
of the ways to connect with people is to get into the habit of giving. And
Absolutely.
so if you're out on the street, if you smile at somebody or give a compliment or give some positive interaction, it doesn't have to be financial, it doesn't have to be anything extensive, but little habits of giving help you connect. And if you connect with people, I think it lifts your mood. I think it clarifies your focus, and it gives you a little more inspiration and motivation to, hey, I want to do something with my life. I want to be part of this collective group.
Right. I think that's a great point. I wanted to ask you about that. What do you think the giving back in any way, and really uh, either volunteering or giving back or just doing things that maybe nobody else knows about, just these little kindnesses. What do you really think that does psychologically for us? Like, would you say that gives us some kind of psychological air, or what does that
What
do for
gives
our
us
psyches and our health?
Yeah, it gives us both psychological and medical. Let me go a little bit astray, but it relates. And that is, they've done great studies in the animal kingdom on friendships and
Mhm.
friendships within species. You can look at dolphins. You can look at even hyenas, elephants, and baboons. You can look across the way, and what they do. And I would not want to be a researcher in this field, but what they do is they follow these animals and they collect their urine and their feces. And what they find is that those animals that are connected with others, those animals that have close relationships, they have lower levels of cortisol. And I don't want to get into any too much technical, but that means they have lower levels of unhealthy chemicals in their body,
Okay.
lower levels of stress, lower levels of negative components. And what studies show is the more connections, the more friendships, the longer and healthier you live. And that's true for baboons, that's true for dolphins, it's true for humans. One of the things that struck me on humans is that you can look at blue zones. Those are areas around the globe that have centenarians, people who live to age 100. And if you look in Japan or look in Italy or look in Costa Rica, you see all them eating all different types of diets. But what you see are groups of people that are committed to connections. They're committed to their family like you're committed to your family. They're out there giving, not getting.
Mm.
So I think it's the connections with people that give you a psychological edge and a physical edge that really helps improve your health and gives you a better chance to get into physical shape and gives you a better chance to have the vitality to keep on living, but also the vitality to make a difference in people's lives.
As far as centenarians, because that's actually something that I've taken an interest in. I've read some about. I just wanted to see your perspective on that. Aside from the social connection, which is huge. I mean, obviously that's very big, um, as far as our health, mental health, and just feeling a part of a group or a tribe, so to speak, and just being a part of something. But as far as what they are doing health-wise and how they are treating their bodies, what have you found that what are some of the centenarians doing that are actually allowing them to increase their longevity to such dramatic ages?
Okay. Well, a couple of things. If people are interested in this, you can kind of research on the internet. They're called blue zones, and they're pockets of area around the world where they have a high percentage of people who are living to age 100. And there are pockets in Italy. There are pockets in Greece. There are pockets in Japan. Even here in California, in Loma Linda, there's a little pocket of centenarians. But in terms of diet, what they have found, diet and exercise, it's actually both. These are people who are physically active. You can go back and look at Kenneth Cooper, who trained the early astronauts. He used
Hmm.
to have the recommendation 10,000 steps a day. You need to take at least 10,000 steps a day. Well, when you look at centenarians, they're all walkers. They all get out and do physical exercise on a regular daily basis. The second component is that they all eat basically different diets, but it's more of a plant slanted diet. It's a
Okay.
diet with a lot of color. And so when you look at the portions of meat and dairy products, they're the lower, smaller portions, not the bigger portions.
Hmm.
And so they depend a lot on eating fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and locally grown food. So when you look at them collectively, it is their physical activity, it is their overall physical health and activity, it is their diet, and then their attitude and connection with others. I think those four components determine a lot of your health and your longevity.
That's the big part of it. That's interesting. And then you mix that with the social component, and obviously this is what's allowing them to live to such fantastic ages, over 100 years old. As a matter of fact, I just want to go back just for a moment and clarify for anybody out there who's listening who maybe didn't understand. I caught myself, sometimes I say things I don't realize. I talked about psychological error, and that's a Dr. Stephen Covey used to talk about that in
Yes.
his work.
Yep.
And so I just wanted to talk, just kind of clarify that for people, meaning that when they felt mentally suffocated because of their life, or maybe they weren't uh, like like Dr. Corder talks about feeling in connection with other people, or just, I mean, there's many reasons to it, but you kind of expanded upon that. So just want to give everybody a frame of reference that that's pretty much what it means, and that the more that we can get together as a unit, either community wise or just within our own families, it helps us to free our mind and to give us that air that kind of we need to
Yeah.
breathe better. So.
Yeah, I really like that phrase. And I'll tell you one example for me that I think is apparent on a regular basis in this country is the victims of terrorist acts, or the
Mm,
victims of a mentally ill person shooting in a theater or shooting in a school. And what do you see with the victims? What do you see with the parents, for example, of a school where the kids have been killed? You see them re-engaging with society. And,
mm,
and, and it takes them from a place where they don't have much psychological air to where they're getting TV air. They're out there sharing their story. They're out there connecting, and then they typically show a purpose, whether it's for gun control or more mental treatment for the mentally ill. They're out there wanting to give. And
right.
I think when you look on the flip side and you look at terrorists, or you look at the people who do those horrific acts, they're disconnected. They are disconnected individuals with society. And so I think one of the ways of getting back to having psychological air, one of the ways of getting back to feeling good emotionally and psychologically, is that connection with people and the act of helping others. And I think that's one of the ways that victims recover. And I think it's one of the ways all of us can recover if we just follow that model.
Right. Yeah, that's a fantastic observation. It's a form of healing, and
Yes, exactly.
it's a form of healing, and that we're all gonna need at one point. And if you just know how to, like you said, utilize the model. I'm all about systems. I love systems because systems are things that can be duplicated over and over again. There's no, there's a big difference between something that's kind of science based or artsy. And artsy, you can kind of go different places with, but when it's kind of based in science, when it's based on principles, it works all the time. And that's why I'm a big fan of systems. So when you follow a model like what you talked about, psychological air, all you got to do is copy it. And
Yep.
when you copy it, you can start the healing process.
Yep.
Uh,
And that reminds me of a segment I saw in the national news about 6 months ago. And it was that photographer in New York City that had spent a decade or so taking pictures of 10,000 individuals in New York City. But what he did that was so different is he asked each person he took a photo of for a little story. And the best story he said he ever got was from a 90-some-year-old lady who told him that her husband had just died. And on his deathbed, she said to him, "Listen, I can't live without you. I just can't possibly go on another day." And he said, "Yes, you can. Just take the love for me and share it with everybody else." And so
hmm,
that's the message she took from,
that's
his
great.
final meeting and final words. She took the love for him and tried to then share it with others. And that allowed her to get some psychological air, allowed her to get reconnected, and to still move forward despite losing the love of her life.
Right.
We all are going to have experiences where we lose people, and we need to regain our psychological air. We need to regain connections.
Right, and it's not, things are going to happen to us all. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do is what happens, and that's you expanded on that
Yep.
perfectly. And for talking about models, and because that's something that people can utilize. Obviously, baby boomers who can read your book, you have models in there that they can follow to give them health on many different facets, many different levels, and that's what Scratch is all about. Because the name Scratch itself is systematic, consistent results achievable through correct habits.
Right.
And it's all about, which is the word scratch, which is models. And one of the things that we both agree on, I wanted you to touch on a little bit also, was I saw that you're a believer in that a lot of your patients that you speak to, you talk to them about kind of taking personal responsibility of their own health and not necessarily relying so much upon the healthcare system.
Yep.
Could you go into that a little bit?
Yes, I would be happy to. And I tell you, as a physician, um, um, I speak with a little remorse in that this country's medical system is currently ranked around 37th best in the world.
Wow.
That's an absolute failure. You'll speak to politicians and they argue various components, but the truth is our medical healthcare system in this world is not very good when you compare it to other countries. And so we currently are going through, Obamacare, which is coming on board, and I'm apolitical. But
Hmm.
what I've noticed that is anytime a new program comes on board, it's always problematic, especially with any large organization, whether it's private or public. When you start a new program, access to care is going to suffer for a while. So my recommendation to all people, especially right now at this time, when we have our financial difficulties, when we have a new healthcare system coming on board, don't depend upon the healthcare system. Don't depend on your physician. You don't need more visits with your physician. You need to take control of your own health. My ideal is to get people off their medication like you have focused on before in your own work.
Right.
I like the idea of getting people off diabetic medication. I like the goal of getting people off hypertensive medication. And I think what most people don't realize is that much of their health is in what they eat and their physical exercise. And if they can combine and change both their those lifestyles and improve those lifestyles, they can tremendously improve their health much more than they could from any single medication. In fact, just as a side, and to close the point, you look at the three leading causes of death in this country. It's heart disease, cancer, and adverse effects from physicians. That includes surgery that's gone south. That includes medication that's been creates side effects. Those two physician-caused problems contribute to the third leading cause of death in this country. So going to your physician office is great, but it can be a killer.
Sounds
So
dangerous.
it
Wow.
is dangerous, and that's why we're the 37th ranked system in the world. In fact, there are studies that show if you go to the hospital in Bangkok, Thailand, you have less chance of getting an infection than if you go to Mass General in Boston.
Mm.
So our country, you know, give it some time to improve, but tell you what, improve yourself first. That's my recommendation.
And that's something we're in agreement upon. I the three things that you just mentioned pretty much are lifestyle driven as well. I mean, we kind of put ourselves in the position of getting, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's very high. I think it's over 80% of like cancer. It comes into within the body, it comes to fruition because of our lifestyle. It's lifestyle driven,
Yeah.
and
Uh,
so it's obviously heart disease.
yes. And a lot of it, they say it's foodborne illnesses today, or health style borne illnesses. I think for all of us, if we can change our eating style, our physical exercise, we can really dramatically not only prevent those illnesses, you can reverse a lot of those illnesses. And that
Yes.
includes cancer, diabetes, hypertension, arthritis. It includes even dementia. There's a lot you can do to prevent all of those illnesses by changing your lifestyle. And that's what I try to push people to do.
Let me ask you a question about where since we're on the topic of we're talking about dieting to a degree, we're talking about lifestyle. What is your opinion upon these a lot of these fad diets versus somebody who's looking more towards a lifestyle change, which is what we kind of more believe in, what 80%, like I'm a big believer in 80% water-based type foods, which is almost vegetarian style lifestyle, high plant-based, high water-based. But just in your opinion, what do you think about fad dieting and all that?
Yeah. Oh, here's, I think, basically the scientific perspective on diets in general. I think they've done very good studies looking at all the diets over the last 20 years. And that could be high protein diets, high carbohydrate diets, low carbohydrate diets, low fat diets. You name it, any type of diet they've tried, 98% of lost calories or lost pounds has been regained. Diets do not work. I think
Hmm.
that's a fundamental truth. So I am not a fan of a diet book. I'm not a fan of going on any special diet. But what I am a proponent of, and you hit it on perfectly, is just changing your eating style. It doesn't have to be changed overnight. It can be changed over time. But like you, I'm a great believer in more of a plant slanted diet.
Right.
And here's the reason why, and that is we've had um, a decline in the quality of our food over the last 30 years. I
Hmm.
think most Americans are aware of that. But what they're probably not aware of is that in our lifespan, or my lifespan, we've lost 10 million farmers from this country. We've lost over 5 million farms. We've replaced all of these small farms with these agricultural giants. These
Hmm.
agricultural giants are really chemical companies. And they're chemical companies that did Agent Orange and were very active in Vietnam in the 1970s. When that war ended, those countries, I mean, those companies switched into production of food. You had the pesticides, you could grow and produce more, but the quality of food has declined. And
Hmm.
so because of the decline of food, meat and dairy products are even more at risk to you today than they were 25, 30 years ago. So I think everybody has to appreciate that fact and adjust accordingly. So you've got to make meat and dairy products the smallest item on your plate, not the largest.
Right, right. And if they are gonna eat dairy or meat or any of that, definitely probably want to go organic, right, or straight from your local farmers if you have that available to you.
Yep. Yes,
Um,
to go organic and local farmers would be absolutely great. And the other thing that people, I think, need to realize, not only have we switched from the small farmer to the agricultural giant,
mhm,
we've switched to a way of distributing food that is to our disadvantage. For example, the wheat today that you'll find in your bread or your pastries has 40-fold, that's 40 times the amount of gluten in that wheat than it did 25 years ago. Why is that?
mhm,
Because you want that bread to look fresh 3 weeks from now. You want that bread to look fresh 3 months ago now when it's served in a store in France. You want it to look fresh. The way you do that is to add a lot of gluten to the wheat. And
mhm,
gluten, if you look in Latin, is glue. It holds it together, but it's not easy to digest, and that's why we have so much gluten sensitivity. So I don't want to belabor the point, but the quality of our food has deteriorated, and we need to adjust. And that's the bottom line for all of us. And I agree with your sentiment. Vegetables, fruits, they're the least contaminated, and probably the best sources to eat for nutrition and health.
right. So let me ask you this, doctor. I mean, obviously this is across the board, not just baby boomers, but let's say whether it's a baby boomer listening or it's somebody who's in their 20s or 30s and they hear what you're saying and they say, okay, that's great, but how do I, maybe they don't know really anything about health. They have no background, they have no education towards health. So how do they start the process? What are some things that they can do or should they start to do to kind of start to make that transition slowly over to a healthier lifestyle?
Well, I'll give you some easy examples, and that is the following. Um, this country spends less on food than any country in the world, any industrial country in the world. We buy cheap food. Compared to France, Italy, Germany, Russia, we buy cheap food. But of all the countries, we spend more on medical health. So my recommendation to people is don't buy the cheapest food. Broccoli is more expensive than getting a Twinkie.
Right.
You know, getting a bottle, getting good water sometimes is more expensive than getting your soda. Ironic as it is. So I would encourage people to try to look for organic food. Try to look for food that is local as much as possible, and to try to look for food that is color, and that try to make it as simple as possible on your plate, whether it's for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. If you have color, you're not eating a bland diet, and you're not eating the typical American diet. So just make a gradual shift away from the food you used to eat to adding some color to your plate, and I think you'll find that you're getting more nutrition, more vitamins, more minerals, more of the appropriate metals that you need, and your health will improve.
Right. Right. And there's one of the objections I get a lot, and I used to get a lot when I was holding my classes and teaching people, is that almost on a weekly basis is, hey Nick, I see what you're saying, which is exactly what you were saying, but you know what? Organic foods, all that stuff, it's just too expensive for me. I can't afford it. I can't do this. And they start to hit you with a list. It's like they already have it memorized, and they
Yep.
hit you with this list of reasons why they can't afford it. But in actuality, the
You
way I look at it is you can't afford not to.
Yes, and I'll tell you, I'll emphasize that point of something I read just a few weeks ago, and it was an article that said the average American couple at age 65 has a net worth in this country of $167,000,
Hmm.
but the average 65-year-old couple in the United States can expect to spend $300,000 on their health from age 65 to the time they both die.
Wow.
So what does that tell you? They don't have enough money.
Right.
And so I advise people, you're better off spending now, um, and not spending later. You know,
Right.
you're
Right.
even buy the more expensive organic product, even if you have to sacrifice something else, and get healthy, and that will save you medical bills. That's going to save you a fortune down the road. So I think spending a little bit now, you'll save more later.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's all, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's all priorities. We have to kind of just sit down and prioritize what's important to us. And I think if people did that more, because, so many people just kind of go through their day, regardless of whether they're 20 years old or 65 years old. We kind of have these things that we're doing all day, and we just take everything else for granted. And it's just like, what, let's just get food. And to them, it's just something you do. They don't realize that food is creating the cells in your body. It's renewing you or aging you. It's all those
Yep.
things, and we don't really look at it that way. And if we took more time to prioritize it, make it more of
And
a, go ahead.
and a simple example of that, Nick, is I think the studies show that 23 million Americans eat at McDonald's every day. And that's fast, it's inexpensive, you get your food, you can inhale it and get back down to work. And
Right.
so, that's this pattern for most people. But what they don't realize, let's just take a Big Mac. And I'm not picking on McDonald's because this is true for all of the fast food companies. But you look at the bun, that's sugar. You look at the relish, that's sugar. You look even at the meat, that actually has some sugar in it. You look at the French fries, they are actually cooked in an oil that has sugar in it. On top of that, if they add ketchup, what is ketchup? It has a lot of sugar in it. So from top to bottom, you're eating a hamburger, but you're eating a ton of sugar. And sugar is one of those compounds that in excess in this country consumes about 150 pounds of sugar a year, an average individual. It's toxic to the body. It
Right.
creates inflammation in the body. It's what causes disease. It's what causes you to age. It's what causes wrinkles. It what damages the brain. Across the board, that cheap, inexpensive Big Mac that tastes so good is not good for your health.
It does, doesn't it?
Simple as that.
I don't remember the last time I had a Big Mac, but it's something. You know what though? While it's still on the topic, because we're gonna get off, I have another question for you. But you can't also, you don't necessarily have to go to extremes. Is what I tell a lot of people is, hey, if you're doing, going back to the 80-20 rule, right? If you're doing what you're supposed to do 80% of
Exactly.
the time, then you know what? If you want to go with the family, or if you want to go with the grandkids, whoever it is around you, and you want to just go have a Big Mac and some nuggets and just go crazy for the day, if you did everything correct Monday through Friday,
You're
it, it,
absolutely correct. You are
it shouldn't be a
absolutely
problem.
right. You are right on target, because I think what they've also done studies that show that if you're can change your diet 6 days a week, and then really on the seventh day eat whatever you want, it actually activates your brain to lower the body set weight point. I, again, don't want to get complicated, but splurging that one day actually changes your metabolism to help you lose weight. So, the person who diets 7 days a week on any diet or sticks to any eating style 7 days a week is not as well off as the person who does it 5 days a week or 6 days a week. So give
Right.
yourself some leeway, give
Absolutely.
yourself a day
Absolutely.
off. That actually will help you,
And
surprising as it is.
And for everybody watching, the way I've broken this down before in other videos that I have on YouTube and other healthy hangouts we've done, but one of the ways that I teach people when I was teaching in my class was, if you break down the week in hours and you look at it from I'm sorry, in days, and you just look at 80% of the week, it comes out to about uh, six and a half, 5.5 days. So what I tell people is, listen, eat right, eat the way that we speak about Monday through Saturday afternoon. And
Yep,
then
perfect.
Saturday night, when it comes for dinner, you can, from Saturday night through Sunday, it's,
Yep.
all bets are off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. And I think by giving that recommendation, boy, you're giving a great advice. And if people can follow that advice, boy, they will get healthier. And they'll have lower medical costs, more vitality. You're moving them in the right direction. I'm very impressed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I actually I just realized we've been talking almost an hour. Wow, haven't
Oh,
really got to any of the questions yet.
no, and I've enjoyed it. And in fact, I bet I need to start listening to your podcast, because whether I listen to your podcast or attend your class, I'm sure I could learn a lot from you. So
I,
kudos to you.
Thank you, so I appreciate that. But I really want to get into one of the things that I see that you speak about, which I'm a big fan of, is earthing or grounding. And for everybody, for people who are not familiar with that, I'll let the doctor go into grounding. I'm big into a lot of the minimalist footwear and things that kind of get us closer to earth and grounding. And I'll let you explain that. But what do you mean when you say to people, when was the last time you've touched the earth, and how does that feel? Like, can you expand upon that?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that is a question. I'll ask two questions sometimes to audiences. When did you last help somebody? But also I'll ask them, when did you last touch the ground? And the people, I tell you, the audiences have a blank stare. They'll say, I'm touching the ground right now. And I'll say, no, you are not. And here's what I mean by it. By touching the ground, I mean, when did you actually make contact with the earth or grass or a tree with your skin? And people think, well, that doesn't have much value. What value does that have? Well, let me offer this explanation. And that is, when we were young, we were all taught about the North and South Pole. And
Hmm.
most of us in grade school learned about that. What we didn't learn about, and what was missed, is the Earth is a 6 trillion ton metric battery that is loaded with free electrons on the surface of the Earth. And that includes the water, and that includes the ground and the plants, loaded with free electrons. So what's the advantage of free electrons? Actually, the human body was designed to absorb electrons.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is, what ages us, there is inflammation and free radicals. And free radicals are little particles that cause damage to the cells or to your DNA. And what helps them is eating a healthy diet with
Hmm.
antioxidants. But what also helps them is free radicals. Free radicals will absorb, free radicals, electrons, and free electrons will absorb those free radicals and quench them. So the more contact you make with the earth, it's like lowering your temperature for someone who has a fever. It,
Right.
it, it gives you the right components to neutralize your body. And the truth is, I don't know, when I was growing up, everyone was out barefoot. I mean, on my block. Well, I think I had 19 kids on our block, and we were all barefoot. We just
Hmm.
had a blast. I look out on my street right now, and I'm looking out the window. Um, I very rarely see a kid barefoot. In fact, you can go to a baby shower, and what do they get? Shoes. And you made the point on shoes. They've done studies. The more expensive shoes you purchase, the more padding, the more injuries you have. I
Yes.
mean, those
Yes.
Ethiopian marathon runners who we see every time when the Olympics rolls around, they're not so dumb. Every time their foot plants on that dirt, they're soaking up electrons.
Hmm.
And that's helping decrease the inflammation that comes from running. So for all people, I recommend, take off your shoes a little bit more often. Get the feet planted in the grass.
Right.
Um, and I think you actually will feel better. And I am a proponent, too, of the grounding sheet. And you can go to the Amazon and buy a grounding sheet. And it's a little sheet that you put on the bottom, at the top of the bottom sheet of your bed, and plug it into the wall. It feeds electrons into your body all night long. And it
Mm.
improves your health, improves your sleep. Um, and it's something that I recommend for a lot of people. And lastly, because I don't want to belabor this, studies on animals like rats and mice, etc., those that touch the earth frequently live longer and are healthier. And those that touch the earth less frequently are more physically ill, have more illnesses, and die earlier.
How about
So
that?
it goes back to connection with the earth, connection with people. Connection is crucial.
That's a good point. I like that the connection you made between the two. That's really good. Another thing about grounding, um, is that, and this is for people who fly often, like yourself, doctor. If you're doing keynote speeches on locations, what happens to a lot of people is they get that jet lag feeling.
Yep, yep.
And because you're in this plane, they don't realize that you're getting radiated to a certain degree while you're in the plane as well. A lot of us don't think of it that way. And part of the jet lag stems from this, 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours, depending on where you're flying to, or more, of this constant bombardment of radiation. So one of the things that you can do to actually get grounded and to kind of reduce the symptoms of jet lag is when you come off the plane is actually go out when you're going outside, try to just step on the grass, take your shoes off. You might look like a nutcase to some people, but if you
Yeah,
actually step on the grass or maybe by your hotel and you walk around on the grass for 15, 20 minutes, that makes a
yep.
significant difference to how you feel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you also hit the point that you may look like a fool. What I used to do is I'd come home from work and I would take off my socks and shoes and just stand in the front yard. Sometimes I would actually sit in the yard with my feet on the grass. My neighbor was trying to sell his house. And
Mm.
after the second month, he came over to me and said, Bill, listen, you're a great guy. I love having you as a neighbor. You're lowering the value of my house. Because every time a real estate agent comes by with their family, there you are sitting out front with your tie and coat and bare feet. I mean, you just look strange, Bill. I'm sorry. So after that, I stopped doing it, and that's where I went and bought the grounding sheet. So don't look like
um,
a fool, but do it.
hey, even if you look, sometimes you gotta. I think sometimes we take ourselves too seriously. I don't care
Yeah,
if you're a doctor, a lawyer, anybody in between, a business person. You just gotta have fun.
yeah,
You gotta have fun with it, with whatever you do. And sometimes you can't be afraid to looking a little silly and just being okay with sometimes being the butt of the joke in that sense.
yeah,
I think it's healthy in a certain
yeah,
respect.
yeah. And to go back to the link, I do think if your audience takes anything away from our discussion tonight, I would hope they take away the word connection. Because I do think if you connect with people, if you connect with the earth, if you connect with God in any way you want in terms of spirituality, if you have those connections going for you, that can help build your physical health and your emotional health and lead you to, I think, to a higher plane and a more meaningful life. So
Well,
I love connections.
for sure, because what happens is after we speak and everything is over, it shows up on YouTube. They'll have a link. We're going to put a link to your website so people can go there. And I would definitely recommend anybody who goes to the site to subscribe. You get the first 10 chapters for free to the book, the Baby Boomer Survivor Kit, and it goes into detail about things like that. But before we end, because I didn't, we've blown through this hour, which is actually phenomenal. I've had a lot of fun on it. But I do want to ask you one question. I didn't get to a lot of them, but this one I do want to ask you on which is you mentioned questions that keep you awake at night, which is questions like have I lived, have I loved, and have I made a difference? And I just kind of want to know, how did those questions come about? How did you create those questions? Where do they stem from, or the inspiration from that? And what do you think asking and answering those questions actually does for us, mentally or emotionally with our health?
Well, I think with a lot of us, and it was true for me, when I quit one of my positions and tried to redesign my life. I look back at the last 10, 20 years of my life, and I noticed that I had spent a lot of time worrying about finances, or a lot of time worrying about my physical health, or a lot of time worrying about my children and how they were going to do. And studies have shown that 92% of worry is useless.
Hmm.
It really is a wasted effort to sit there and worry. And so one of the goals, I think, is to shift your mental thinking and to shift your mental thinking in a direction towards what you want in your life, not what you don't want. And I think in that context, you can start changing your thinking towards better questions. And better questions, I think, for most individuals are just threefold. And that is, I think it doesn't matter about the financial pressure or the work
Oh,
issues or what.
I'm sorry, doctor. I don't want to cut you off, but I actually froze up for about 30 seconds there. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Could you just go back and go over that one more time because we had a freeze on
Yes.
our
Yes,
station.
and I'll make it shorter this time too. But I think for a lot of people, you can ask questions about your finances or the stressors that keep you up at night. But I think it boils down to to three fundamental questions that encapsulate everything, and
Mm.
that is: have you lived, have you loved, and have you made a difference? I think those are the three cornerstones for all of us. And I think for all of us, if we make a difference in other people's lives, like you're making with your program, that's a huge check mark that gives you a psychological boost and makes your life of value. If you have someone to love, and you're in a good, loving relationship. I've been married 34 years. That's a huge bonus and a huge plus that lifts up the value of your life. And then if you've lived, and by that to me is making connections with people and getting involved with people and not being isolated. So if you've lived and loved and made a difference, everything else is secondary, you know. And so I'm a great proponent of looking at those three questions and redesigning your life around those three basic questions.
That was a
I love
that
your sounds.
I catch everybody with those little crazy sounds, but
Yeah.
that basically is telling us that our time together for today anyway has come to an end. But I just want to say to you, Doctor, that I had a blast. This was a fantastic interview. I feel like we could have probably been talking for another hour easily,
Yeah.
easily. Um,
And Nick, I think you and I have a lot in common in terms of our beliefs, and so I would just like to encourage the audience. This is just one of your interviews, but I think you're on target, and I think you can help an awful lot of people. So I hope your audience really stays tuned to you, stays tuned to your program, and follows your recommendations, because everything I've heard is right on target. I really support you.
I appreciate the kind words, and we'll definitely make sure and make an effort to put your information on our site so people can get contact with you, of course. And one thing I want to do before we get off the air now is just we can make a promise if we can get together one more time on a Healthy Hangout before the end of this summer so we can get into some more good
You
stuff.
Nick, I'd be happy to come on your show anytime, and I'm going to start listening to your show too. So that's a promise. That's a promise I'll keep. And you
I,
don't have
pre-
to stand on a ledge for me to keep that promise.
I definitely appreciate that, Doctor. So everyone, this has been another episode of the Healthy Hangout. You've heard it directly from Dr. William Corder, who we will definitely have back on the show for sure sometime before the end of August. And we'll see you guys on the next episode.